President Zelensky is insisting that the deadly missile strike that hit a Polish village on Tuesday was not Ukrainian. In a televised address, Zelensky said, quote, "I have no doubt that it was not our missile or our missile strike. I want us to be fair, and if it was the use of our air defense, then I want that evidence."
Ukraine correspondent for the Financial Times, Christopher Miller, tweeted that he spoke with a NATO country diplomat who hit out against Zelensky's claims, saying, "This is getting ridiculous. The Ukrainians are destroying confidence in them. Nobody is blaming Ukraine, and they are openly lying. This is more destructive than the missile."
It's a pretty strong statement, but I understand where he's coming from there. There is no real doubt, as far as I can tell, that the missile was Ukrainian. As we discussed yesterday, I understand the argument that the Polish authorities have said they do not blame Ukraine in a moral sense because Ukraine is defending itself in the context of this war that Russia initiated. So they are not, they were not condemning Ukraine. So to go this unnecessary step, wholly unnecessary, and say, well, the missile wasn't even Ukrainian, that's a lie. And political officials should not lie.
Especially when the implications of a lie like that are so extreme. What we're talking about now is engaging a NATO country, which is why you're probably seeing this NATO official talking off the record saying this is negligent. You're trying to literally instigate World War III, and I understand from a political perspective why you would want the whole of the Western world at your back, Ukraine, but you can't fudge the facts in order to manifest this outcome, which frankly is likely to lead to nuclear war and civilizational level disaster.
Yeah, which is what happens when conflicts are allowed to just keep going on without massive pressure being put to end them. Mistakes begin to pile up, and then those mistakes could beget future conflicts. What if the people in that village there were people who were killed? Then I don't know exactly where this village is, but now there'll be anger toward whoever, and so that will be that. It's not going to beget some war, but in medieval history, that's how it happened, right? Those people remember, and then their descendants want to take vengeance, and then you have wars and blood feuds, etc., that last forever. And so the risk of having some reason for future conflict. It increases as this goes on.
It's irresponsible, but I do think that the silver lining here is at least we're seeing some pushback now from senior officials. So far, we've come from the hagiography of Zelensky over the summer where he was doing, Vogue magazine spreads. And do you remember we covered it here on the show? These kind of wind-blown faux military photo shoots with his wife. Finally, it seems the dam has started to break and we're able to have an honest conversation about what's going on in the region.
Yeah, and I've always said I hold our officials account. Like, Zelensky is the president of a nation that is being invaded, and whatever. He's going to do what he's going to do. He's going to say what he's going to say from the standpoint of leading this defense. We don't have much control over that, just like we don't have much control over what Vladimir Putin does. But we have control over how our money is spent.
Right.
And if our money is being given to them, it can come with strings. We have control over what our State Department tells Zelensky, what it says to Putin. That's what we have control over, and that is where our responsibility to be responsible lies.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, here at home, U.S. support for Zelensky seems stronger than ever in some sense. Here's Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin saying that no matter who's responsible for the missile attacks, ultimately it's Russia's fault.
And whatever the final conclusions may be, the world knows that Russia bears ultimate responsibility for this incident. Russia launched another barrage of missiles against Ukraine, specifically intended to target Ukraine's civilian infrastructure. This tragic and troubling incident is yet another reminder of the recklessness of Russia's war of choice.
The Biden administration is also continuing to help fund Ukraine in its war with Russia, with the White House putting forth a new $30 billion aid proposal just this week. The U.S. has funneled just over $91 billion in aid to Ukraine since the war began. That's double the average of what we spent per year in the Afghanistan war.
Yeah, I think it's very important to grapple with just how much money we're giving them. We are giving them tons and tons of money. That's a pretty staggering statistic.
It's much more than Russia's total military budget. The price tag for canceling all medical debt back in 2019, sorry, all of my statistics are campaign aged, was $81 billion. So consider how that money could be spent at home rather than abroad.
And I always say, I know there's some debate over this, you might have some debate over this, but government spending, many economists think contributes to inflation. There's some government spending going on there, and then obviously the effects of the war are contributing to higher prices for food and energy, which then themselves can have an inflationary impact indirectly. So we are paying for this in more senses than one, and the American people, I don't know how they feel about it exactly. I think they feel that Ukraine is the victim and should be defended, and that this is wrong, and that Vladimir Putin is a very evil and authoritarian tyrant and autocrat. That's certainly how I feel about it. But how much more suffering should be inflicted here at home without, are we saying, well, here's the limit, here's the last day you're going to get a check from us? No, apparently we're not saying that.
And look, it's worth noting, I'm sorry, what a country we live in where Lloyd Austin gets to be Secretary of Defense and make statements that are clearly pushing toward continued investment in military investment. As a former Raytheon employee, board member, someone whose conflict of interest seems almost so apparent it feels cliche to even mention it. But in the context of our media cycle, there's no pushback against the idea of the revolving door. There's no interrogation about the interests that are aligning here. There's no interrogation of the fact that we now have a deficiency in our own missile cache and our own ability to defend ourselves because that's the sheer volume of weaponry that's been sent to Ukraine. There's no discussion of where these weapons are going. There was that CBS report about 30% of the weapons not being tracked, and then CBS got so much pressure they pulled down that report. And of course, there's the ongoing conversation about how much influence there is with these Nazi-aligned elements in Ukraine and the Azov battalion. So I know that some folks feel like that stuff is overstated, but when you have incidences happening, like what just happened earlier this week with CNN, where they rolled some B footage in the background of some Ukrainian soldiers, and one of them gave the Heil salute, and they had to scramble and pull that down and make their apology. So this keeps happening over and over again. Jon Stewart awarded a medal to someone who just turned out to have Nazi tattoos.
Especially because the media is a hair trigger for any whiff or hint of right-wing extremism that they could plausibly portray as Nazi-related in some way, even though the threat of extremist groups in this country is very, 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 very small. You wouldn't get that impression from the often very kind of apocalyptic and melodramatic coverage of it. But here we have, and fine, make the argument that, well, it's necessary to ally with Nazis, just as it was necessary to ally with the Soviets or whatever the case would be. That war creates bad allies, fine, but they're not admitting that. They want to pretend that that's not the reality.
Exactly.
And there's so much. You're right that there's so much lack of curiosity in the mainstream media about who could be pushing for war because they have financial incentive, because of defense contractor connections, just as there was. It's very similar to the lack of interest in pushing back on the revolving door between major pharmaceutical companies and the government. Yeah. And this, to the extent that certain COVID-related therapeutics and vaccines are going to be, not just speedily approved, but mandated in various places based on the input of people who financially profit from their position from doing that.
For sure.
It's very concerning. Well, we talk about it.
We talk about it.
More Rising right after this. Stay with us.